I'd lost my father to mental health, and I remember looking at his body when I went to his funeral, when they have the open casket, and just going, why can we not talk about this stuff? That had kind of rang a bell in me.
If we get into mental space, and for the people who have never heard of it before, what is it that the organisation really does?
MENTL, MENTL, started life as a content platform. So it just started as me trying to tell stories and just share more information with the world around mental health. There weren't conversations taking place around mental health. $9 trillion a year the world economy is losing through disengaged employees. So these are people that are actually turning up to work but are just disengaged. And for the UAE, it's potentially up to $4.5 million per hour.
Per hour?
Per hour.
For the first time ever, the Chef JKP Podcast is going live. We're going to be at Time Out Market Dubai as we bring the heat with unfiltered, exclusive conversations featuring some of the biggest names in hospitality. Mark your calendars. April 13th, 20th and 27th for 3 unforgettable nights of behind-the-scenes stories, insider secrets and culinary revelations. Want in? We are giving away tickets. All you have to do is follow both Instagram accounts and keep your eyes peeled for your shot at winning a pair. Don't just listen, be part of the experience. Welcome back to the Chef JKP Podcast. We often dive deep into the world of food, flavors, and the hustle of hospitality. But today, we're stirring the pot in a different direction, one that's absolutely crucial for everyone in this industry. This season is all about wellness. Today, we talk about mental health. Yes, we live for the adrenaline of the kitchen, the late nights, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. But amidst the action of service, how often do we pause to check in on our own well-being? On the podcast this week, we welcome Scott Armstrong. Scott is the powerhouse behind MENTL, a platform dedicated to tearing away the silence surrounding mental health. With over 3 decades as an award-winning journalist, including stints as editor-in-chief for publications like Arabian Business, Times of Oman, he's now channeling his storytelling prowess to champion mental health well-being. He's also the visionary behind the MENTL Awards, celebrating those making waves in the mental health advocacy. In this episode, Scott serves up unfiltered insights on the mental health challenges we face in hospitality and beyond. From managing stress in high-octane environments to breaking down the stigmas that hold us back. He has actionable advice that changes the way you think and feel. So whether you're a chef burning the midnight oil, a restaurateur juggling a million tasks, or simply someone who knows the weight of the daily grind, this one's for you. Listen out for a story. You know what? He has some belters in this show. Time to rock and roll.
Hi, I'm Scott Armstrong. I'm the founder of MENTL. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please remember to share, subscribe, and like it. It helps the podcast more than you know. Thank you.
So, Scott, a very warm welcome to the Chef JKP Podcast. It's an absolute honor to have you on the show. But as is customary, can you please tell me your first or favorite childhood food memory?
Oh, it's got to be my grandmother. Used to make an amazing. She would do the Christmas pudding and the Christmas cake. Christmas cake, very bad for you, but she'd be feeding it with brandy all year.
What time of year would she start doing that?
About 6 months in advance, she would start feeding this thing.
Right.
So it was pretty potent by the time you got around to Christmas. So as a 6 and 7 year old, I don't think you'd quite recognise what effect it was having on her. It was definitely, you could taste the love, shall we say, or the brandy. Yeah, so I guess that's my most treasured memory. She was a wonderful human being and I had a very special relationship with her. So, yeah, I guess my grandmother's Christmas cake.
And which part of the UK are you from?
Nottingham, so the Midlands, not remotely classy.
Okay.
A knife crime capital of the UK. So
Lovely.
It's we're very proud at the minute, particularly this year, because our football team's doing very well.
Right.
For the first time in about 30 years.
Oh,
so
wow.
They've not been great for my mental health since I started supporting them as a child. But so Nottingham in the Midlands, where Robin Hood was from.
Okay, and then so if you go back to sort of the, family meals, Sunday roast, that kind of stuff, what were you having? Was it the traditional things? Was it something weird and wacky? Was it something basic?
I mean, you look at the food that we were eating in my generation; it was pretty awful. I mean, I think I remember one of my favourites being something called the Dane-Pack bacon grill, which had cheese on it. And I've no idea. That wasn't meat, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, absolute rubbish. So, yeah, there was a lot of... I think this was the kind of when convenience meals first started coming through. So I'm of that generation that was basically force-fed convenience food. Not... Looking back on it right now, I'd never give my daughter it.
But it did its job at the time, of course.
Well, I'm still here, so yes.
And then when you went sort of towards your college years, education, any foods that you were sort of leaning towards? You were still trying to eat not great food?
Do you know what? I wasn't very selective about it because I kind of had a bit of a checkered path. So sort of 15, 16, 17, I was sort of homeless, jumping around on people's couches and temporary accommodation. I finally got into employment when I was 16 years old. So at that point, it was more about anything and everything, and just having regular income, regular food. I can't say I really thought too much about it at the time. It was, and again, it would have been, I was completely independent.
Right.
So, I was a 16-year-old trying to be an adult.
Yeah.
So it was pretty much anything that you could, again, it would be a continuation of the convenience food. I think it was a good few years before I started even thinking about what I was eating.
And what was that first job?
It was junior reporter on the Newark Advertiser, which is a small market town weekly paper, £5,000 a year. And the job was the making of me and the saving of me at the same time.
How did you go about getting the job? Did you know that you wanted to sort of go into that style or that role of work?
Well, I mean, I didn't emerge because of my situation. I didn't leave school with many qualifications. I got 5 GCSEs, but I failed geography, which is really, really difficult to do. Writing was kind of like, I'd always had a massive love of books, of reading. I used to write my own stories as well. So
right.
I used to love that. So writing seemed to be the path for me. There was 2 things I wanted to be, or there was 2 things I really loved. One was writing, and one was actually the law and being a lawyer. But then one day a friend of my father's showed me all the books that we'd have to read and study for 5 years to become a lawyer. And I was like, yeah, I think journalism's probably the one.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Path of least resistance.
But then, how long did you stay in that first job for then?
First job, like nearly 4 or 5 years.
Oh, so you must have loved it.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I've been insecure all my life, but as you imagine, as a 16-year-old, I was quite insecure. But it forced you to open up, forced you to, you had to go and talk to people. You had to go and hear their stories. So it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about myself. I was very lucky as well because my first sort of, the newsroom I worked in was run by I still remember her, Julia. Great. She was my news editor, but run by a woman. So she was very empathetic, very caring, very interested in developing my skills.
Okay.
So she really sort of helped me on the journey. So yeah, it was also a period of stability. So I've got lots of good memories about that first job. I worked with a really nice small team of people, from the sports editor Tony, my best mate at the time Danny Taylor, who remains one of the best sports writers in the world right now. He's award winning. I think he's on The Athletic these days, but he's ex-Guardian and that sort of thing. So it was just a real family team, which was something I kind of missed. I didn't really have an amazing family experience,
right,
shall we say. So they gave me some structure, they gave me some support, and yeah, I think I began to almost heal in that space as well to some degree.
But what I want to understand also back then, it was a time when, internet wasn't around. You know, you had to chase the stories.
Yeah.
How would you go about doing that on a day-to-day basis?
You'd read your own newspaper to start with. You'd be looking at what's, small stories, public notices. Often when people were getting married or they were doing things, they would have to put notices in the council chambers. You could the council. You'd be in the community. You'd have to spend time in the community. You might remember, the village shops would also always have notices.
Right.
So if you were in the community and you built that relationship with your community, people would reach out. You had more time then as well. I mean, this was a weekly paper as well, which was perhaps the best thing for me starting because we didn't quite have that daily deadline. So you had time to go and chase and investigate, or follow up. And we had a relationship with the police, with the ambulance. We'd speak to the local inspector every morning. What's happened? Had there been any crime? Was there anything to follow up on? Any trends? There was courts. People were, interesting stories about children being born in different interesting circumstances. Just whether shops and restaurants were doing well. It would be get out, use your feet, walk around, go into the local businesses and talk to them and just go, look, anything happening, anything new. And sometimes you'd be helping them with issues, whether they had an issue with the council, whether they had some exciting expansion, whether they were looking for people, whether they came across an interesting story, because everybody's got a story.
Right, yeah.
But it was making the time, but also having the time to create connection in the community, which is something I think we lose with social media these days, to a certain degree. It's easier and it's harder at the same time.
So then after those sort of 4-5 years, what did you decide, which was the path? Still within journalism, right?
I was a journalist for literally 33 years, bar a quick break just a few years ago to go into strategic communications. But I was in journalism for most of my life. Though I left Newark, which is a sleepy market town, which quite picturesque, and my second job was in Grimsby, which was less picturesque, if I'm honest with you. But I mean, I had good fun, and I moved from a weekly paper to a daily newspaper, so it was. What
was the difference for people who don't,
a lot more fish.
Who wouldn't know?
A lot more fish,
right?
No, I mean, Newark in many respects was quite economically prosperous in many ways. It was a market town. It had its crime issues. Right. It had its social issues, but it was relatively well to do. It had some really nice, beautiful, very rural farming land around it. So there was plenty of money around and plenty of kind of economic opportunity back then, particularly with, again, pre-internet days, online shopping. Market towns were that hub, so they were real commercial centres, so there was money to be made there. Grimsby had been prosperous as a port, but when I got there, a lot of the docks had shut down. There was big social issues within the town, so it was more economically depressed. People felt it had a harder vibe to it. Still had fun. People were out there to party and party hard because they had hard lives, and then they combated that by partying hard as well. So I had some good memories. And I ran the music. I read the music page for that paper, and I met some of the biggest bands in the world through this Grimsby evening.
Like which type of bands?
Blur, Damon Albarn,
wow, okay.
Michael Jackson, Madonna, all random. I spent the weekend with Blur. Because they came and played at the Cleethorpes Pier, the Pier nightclub in Cleethorpes. So they let me follow them around all weekend.
How was that?
It's brilliant. I mean, this is right at the height of the Blur versus Oasis.
So the Britpop era.
The Britpop era.
Indie.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was, I mean, if I'm honest with you, I probably preferred Oasis, but... But I've got massive respect for them, and I love the music, and actually spending time with them was also, just fantastic. And you were like, I don't know, I was maybe 20 probably.
And that must have been amazing.
It was cool. Yeah, I mean, it really was cool. And I went down. I mean, I met Madonna. Madonna didn't notice she'd met me, obviously, otherwise. But there was a band from Grimsby that were recording their first soundtrack, their first album, down in MCA Studios, I think it were. They were called the Giant Killers. Okay, lovely guys. I've no idea if they're still going, but that was at the same time that Madonna was recording the soundtrack to Evita.
Oh,
and she took everybody out for lunch. on all the different studios. So
Right.
yeah, it was
That
fun.
must have been quite nice.
Yeah, it was quite nice. Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, because you've done an incredible amount of journalism in the first sort of 10 years of your career. There must have been some also as a journalist and as an editor, as an acting editor, there must have been some quite sort of heavy hitting stories, especially around those sorts of northern Midlands to the northern part of the UK.
Yeah.
How was it sort of for you, whether it was reporting, whether it was reading the stories, whether it was fact checking as an editor? Because it must have been, like, I've not been in that field myself, but I can imagine it's gathering so much information, gathering fact, making sure that everything adds up, triple checking.
Yeah.
It must be quite full on.
It is full on. I, for the most part of my career, worked for local newspapers rather than sort of the massive nationals. I did work for a couple of big news agencies, but working in newspapers that were tied to a community, you really had to get things right. Because you were in that community. So if you got something wrong, you knew about it pretty quickly. So there was back then this big responsibility to get things as factually accurate. Was it fair? Is it fair? Is it balanced? Is it accurate? Were the kind of the three tenets of how we did journalism back then. I miss that form of journalism in today's world, where we've got so many alternative facts and we don't really have to, I'm dismayed by Meta and it's stepping away from fact checking, that sort of thing. Yeah, and I also mourn the loss of proper journalism, because we've got more information, more facts than we've ever had. The guy who, I can't remember his name now, Horrell or something like that, but this psychiatrist and this social writer has been writing the fact that now humanity has access to more facts than it's ever had, and yet we've got no, that accuracy and what is the truth, the difference between facts and truth, what is the actual truth. We were trying to, back then, make sure that everything that was in the newspapers was as true as it possibly could be. So yeah, it was kind of full on, and you did come across some incredibly powerful stories. Whether you were and sometimes you'd be meeting people at their absolute worst, when they'd lost loved ones in difficult circumstances, whether or not there was an injustice that had happened behind that, or you were uncovering things that had been covered up for some time. Grimsby was an interesting one. And in the end, a national newspaper picked up my stories, because in the UK what happens is the local newspapers will break a story, and then a lot of the national newspaper journalists would be reading the locals and go, oh, that's a good story, I'll not nick that. Sometimes they would pay you, sometimes they would, but they would take that story and then run with it on a bigger level. In Grimsby, the first night I went out in Grimsby, I went to a nightclub, and halfway through the night you watched all these kids, and they were my age, like in their 20s, start taking off prosthetic arms and legs and were waving them in the air, and everyone was like, oh, this is so fun. And you were like, what on earth is happening here? Why are so many kids with prosthetic limbs in this nightclub? And it took me weeks and weeks and weeks to find out what was actually happening, but eventually I managed to get a policeman on the record to say that he knew what was happening. And back then there was a thing called temazepam, which is a drug that was prescribed to pensioners. And it came in gel form.
And what did this drug do for pensioners?
It was basically it was kind of like a nerve medication, so it calmed things down. But what was happening was that the pensioners were selling these prescriptions to the kids, and they were called, and the kids would then melt down the gel form of that and inject them into their arms, and that would give them a weird sensation. But then the gel would cool and harden in their arms and legs and their veins. Then they would get gangrene, and then they would need to have their arms and legs removed. So we broke the story. I wrote that story, and I think it was the Daily Mail, which is not my favourite publication, but back then they picked it up and it became a government inquiry, and eventually temazepam was no longer be able to be prescribed. It could only be in tablet form as opposed to in gel form. But that's the bizarre. Wow. That's why that change in the law happened, because kids were, you know, and it's a nightclub with lots of kids dancing, waving prosthetic arms and legs in the air.
But I mean, that what a phenomenal thing to sort of uncover, you know, but just almost accidentally.
Yeah, just, and that was it. And I wouldn't say I was the team I worked with are much better, but it's kind of observation, just looking around and going, being interested, being curious, I guess, at that. And there's times when I haven't been as curious as I should have been, and I worked with journalists who were more skilled and could see stuff, but I would sometimes uncover weird things and go, oh, that doesn't quite look right. I'd miss the raging fire in front of me, but I'd find the temazepam injecting teenagers. So yeah,
very interesting.
It's a fascinating career, really.
So then, at which point did you decide, or how did the opportunity come about for you to go to the Bahamas?
I had been working in York for a newspaper, and it had a really amazing boss called Kevin Booth, rest his soul, one of the best mentors I've ever had. And he had been made redundant by the parent company who were trying to save money. So when he lost his job, I basically just went, right, I'm going to look for something. I tried to come to Dubai. I got to the last two for a job in Dubai, but then I got saw this job advertised on a early version of the internet for business editor for the Nassau Guardian. And I was like, well, I'll apply. And I got it. So,
amazing.
So we went to the Bahamas.
Okay, so tell all about the Bahamas. First of all, what was the official job that you had to do there? What was
I was a business editor, so
okay.
I wrote the business pages, and a lot of Bahamian journalism was a lot like Daily Mail. It was very gossipy. It was very trying to do scandal all the time, because that even back then that sold. Whereas I went in to be the business editor and try and lift up. I've always kind of wanted to, as a community journalist, I've always felt like I needed to try and lift up. So I went in there and got to know the business sector. Was there for a year.
And how big is the business sector in the Bahamas? I mean, back then.
Oh, I mean, it still had had lots of interest and lots of money flowing through it. That's back. I'm not quite sure how it is these days, but you know, a lot of businesses pushed money that they perhaps didn't want the tax office to. It was also a big maritime sector because of it was a flag of convenience, I think they called it. So a lot of ships would be registered in the Bahamas,
right? And
they also had a huge amount of tourism. So lots of stories around tourism because you know they had the first Atlantis was in the Bahamas, and lots of golf courses and lots of massive hotels.
But then I'm just wondering, was it as scandalous, or were you more sort of focusing on the smaller business? Were you focusing on sort of the more maritime side of things, or was it
a bit of everything? You just had to be a bit of everything and try and learn the ins and outs of every single industry. I mean, there was some fascinating stories at the time. At the time, there was a huge complex called Baha Mar that was being built, and this was going to create thousands of jobs. But that got mired in all sorts of problems, whether it was the Chinese investing or whether it was the Americans investing, and would it ever come to a fruition? There was a lot of local opposition to the Chinese bringing in labour because they felt that they were robbing Bahamians of their birthright or or jobs. The fact being, actually, that it was a fascinating one, because if you ask the Bahamian Contractors Association how many contractors they had in the islands, they maybe had 5,000, and this job was so big it needed about 10 to 15,000. So if every single other piece of work on the island had stopped, they still couldn't have met 50% or 100% of the quota. But there was a lot in terms of politics. There was a lot of backwards and forwards in the parliament there. It was a really interesting place. It was kind of a little bit like, in some respects, they wore their. Sometimes you would need to, there was a big bribe culture there.
Okay.
If you wanted your furniture to come through customs, the fastest way to do that would be to, make a donation to. So honestly, it was kind of like,
I love that though.
It was kind of out in the open though. They kind of wore it on their sleeves. And the guys I was working with on the newspaper, on the Nassau Guardian, I mean, I loved them. They were fantastic. They were so ambitious, so hungry, so energetic, brilliant team to work with, and I still really am grateful for the people that I worked with on that newspaper. So it was an interesting place. But we were only there for a year, and I had a choice between Jamaica or Abu Dhabi. As it turns out, I got offered 2 jobs at the same time, and we chose Abu Dhabi for 2 reasons. One, because I tried to come out, and I already knew that this part of the world was good, and that was, 20 years ago. It was 20 years ago. It was already a great place to come and be. But also at the same time, the US were trying to extradite a drug lord from Jamaica in Kingston, which is where I would be based. They called Dudder's Coke, and people were getting their arms macheted off. So as a husband and a father, we went, do you know what? I think we'll give Abu Dhabi a go.
Yeah, what was the responsible choice? Yes.
Seems sensible. It seems sensible.
So then what was the post in Abu Dhabi?
The National. Again, I went... great guy called Tom Ashby hired me to be the work on the business desk for the National down in Abu Dhabi. Again, great team, great people, and then in the fullness of time, I ended up taking over the digital operations and becoming the kind of online news editor, because everybody was very opposed to the internet back then.
When you first arrived, how much of a culture shock was it, though, coming from the Bahamas to
it was
Abu
massive,
Dhabi?
But in a very, very good way, because my wife couldn't work in the Bahamas. There was not much she could do there. I loved the Bahamas, but there wasn't a huge variety of things to do.
Yeah.
There was a lot of rum, and there was a lot of sitting on the beach and staring at a beautiful horizon.
Yeah.
And that was, and a lot of being on boats.
Sure.
Whereas even back then, we arrived in Abu Dhabi, or I arrived ahead of my wife, and went into what was Marina Mall there at the time, and just looked around, going, "You're going to be all right, Mrs. Armstrong. You're going to enjoy it here." So, it was a big culture shock. It was moving from small to a big city vibe. It was fantastic.
But also, it was the national newspaper of the country. So you were in charge of digital or business or both?
Started on business, and then how I kind of grew. Tom basically put me in charge of the business section on the website, because the website was still pretty nascent even back then, 20 years ago, and my job was to try and make it better and perform better with the news that we had on the business section. And I did a good job. I did a good job with it. So eventually they asked me to do the same thing for the entire site. It took me 3 years to convince them to have a mobile site.
3 years?
3 years to convince them to have a mobile site.
Why?
They weren't convinced. The internet was still a fad. I often got opposition from people who are now good friends, who were like, "Yeah, but that's not real journalism, is it? It's not real." The photographer didn't want to spend any time giving us pictures for the internet, because he felt it was, destroying the art of the photograph.
Right, but then,
and with the benefit of hindsight, they were probably right in some respects.
In that, maybe, yes, but you had the foresight to ensure that
The National's first mobile site was a PowerPoint that I had done. So I did a PowerPoint, and I basically took some cues from, say, The Guardian or The Independent or The Times, and just did a mishmash and go, "Look, this is what it could look like." 3 years later, they launched that, and I was like, "No, that was supposed to be just like a mood board, not the actual site." They did quickly evolve it, but that was their first mobile website was based off a PowerPoint that I'd thrown together.
I'm just wondering, did they say, "You know what, Scott, you were right"? No. Okay. No. But then what?
But they were very good to me.
I'm sure
they were. Yeah.
But then, what prompted the move to go from sort of to go to Oman as well? Because I'm quite interested, because Abu Dhabi is great, and then Oman is a very different way of life. Still in the GCC, Omanis are amazing, but very dynamic in Abu Dhabi. Very different pace of life in Muscat, I can imagine.
It was. It was the opportunity to be an editor-in-chief. It was the opportunity to actually take charge of something for the first time. They approached me. We had some reservations to start with, but in the end I went for it. My wife stayed in Abu Dhabi for a while, but then eventually moved across. But yeah, it was just the opportunity to try and learn on the job and be the boss rather than be a leader. Because I must admit, I learned some big management lessons about how you interact with teams. I was very much focused on the tech. I was very much focused on the journalism, and nobody had ever taught me how to be a leader. And that job showed some things that I was good at, but a lot of things that I needed to improve as well. So it was a real learning curve for me, that one.
But then, for me, I think that the jackpot job is, being editor-in-chief of Arabian Business. I mean, that must have been a phenomenal post for you, in the sense that, you've been in that industry within journalism for some time.
Yeah.
You understand businesses, you understand leaders, but seeing the whole picture of that, how was it? Because I can imagine it must have been also just extremely stressful at times.
Yeah. I took that job in the kind of tail end of COVID, and I went into that job saying, I want to do things differently. I want to focus on values and what our values are. I don't want to do clickbait. I want us to help. Again, I want us to lift up. The business sector had been absolutely battered by COVID,
right.
Even though the UE government had done an amazing job, and actually, we had it far better here than in many parts of the world. So I wanted to go in and just kind of take a different tack, which was about quality.
Right.
I was also super interested in the kind of human emotional side of the business world. So I was very much focused on the future of work. I was very much focused on the mental health issues inside the world of business. Diversity, equity, inclusion, which I know is deeply unfashionable in some parts of the world these days, but I still remain a fervent believer in it. So yeah, things like that, and ESG and the rise of ESG, whether it be the environment, and just looking at the kind of the stories. Often the business world was very much focused on facts, figures, profit and loss, and I always wanted to be a human storyteller. So gender diversity, the rise of women's rights in Saudi Arabia, and that amazing journey that the kingdom's been on. Trying to unpack those stories. At the time as well, we had the thawing of relations between Qatar and the rest of the Gulf, particularly Saudi Arabia. So there was some really interesting stories to get behind. And it was a privilege, and at the same time, by the end of our journey, I was already very much focused on mental health. I went into that job having lost my father to, actually at the time didn't know it was depression that had taken him from us, but I'd lost my father to sort of mental health. So I was asking questions of myself, I was asking questions of the world, and was already beginning to think that mental health was something that was super important to me. And let's just say we disagreed on the editorial direction by the end of my tenure.
Before we get into what we really want to talk about, which is mental space and mental health, I have a lot of food writers on the show. What I also wanted to understand from your end, or a business perspective, with that particular publication, did you ever get into any sort of hot water if you wrote, or the team wrote, an article, let's say, on a big tycoon, or those sorts of people that their office, for example, or that big potato, let's say, didn't agree with? Would you get an email? Would you get a phone call? Or would there be anything like that at all? Or was it all about fact checking beforehand?
For me, again, with that, is it because I came with those three tenets of: is it fair? Is it balanced? Is it accurate? Are you willing to listen? That if you have that as your kind of core operating principle, then it tends to avoid being, getting dragged into that, because you would look at things going, is it fair? Is it accurate? Is it balanced?
Right.
So that would avoid some trouble. Yeah, there were a couple of articles where people would pick up the phone and go, I don't necessarily like this, or can you change that? And it would depend on, was there information that we weren't aware of? Did you not tell us about this? Therefore, we might be willing to change something online. But 9 times out of 10, if the journalism was correct and there was nothing wrong with it, we would often say no. Often, and it would be, and my old editor Kevin Booth again used to use this line all the time, which is like, often they would be complaining about, if they were complaining, it would be about the headline. as opposed to the article.
Okay.
Because the article, you have the space to read and explore and unpack all the nuances of a particular story. But often headlines, particularly in this day and age, and I online journalism these days, I used to think it was amazing, and now it just alarms and worries me, and I call myself a recovering journalist in these days.
Right.
But that whole, how do you write an engaging headline that isn't then an inaccurate headline? That was the challenge, or how do you convey a story in 5 words? So sometimes it would be the headline that they would have more issue with than the actual facts in the story, which were beyond question, shall we say.
Okay, I find that really interesting. So then after sort of 30 years in journalism, why did you then decide to have a complete career change? Because some people would have said, you're crazy, what are you doing? You're at the pinnacle, you could go on, but then to change it into something completely different. Why?
I'd always felt like I wanted to make a difference with the journalism. We ran campaigns. I was fortunate enough to be involved in campaigns that got people back into work during the millennium, and got to get shown by Number 10 Downing Street by Tony Blair as gratitude for the work that we'd done, or we helped change the law to protect children from kidnappers in the UK. So I was always had that kind of campaigning urge, that and also always had that urge to lift up, shall we say. So there was a part of me that was quite resistant to this clickbait. And I will say the conversation inside, even Arabian Business at the time, was there was a lot of pressure for fast bite-sized stories as opposed to deep work.
Right.
So let's just say that's a difference of opinion. So there was that. But as I say, I had lost, even in the previous job, I'd lost my father to mental health. And I remember looking at his body when I went to his funeral, when they have the open casket, and just going, why could we not talk about this stuff? Because while my childhood wasn't amazing on a lot of fronts, I had a good adult relationship with my dad, and we talked about many difficult things about even from my childhood, but he couldn't open up to me about his struggles. And he was a very strong, very successful CEO. A lot of anger in him, which when we got into his past, I understood. But so that had kind of just rang a bell in me, and I was increasingly looking at the world. I got at the time I had a boy who had gone through the pandemic at university pretty much by himself. Thankfully, he had a girlfriend at the time, so that was some company for him. But I was looking at the statistics around young men and the suicide statistics around young men, which are alarming. I was looking at my daughter, at the time was 5 or 6, seeing the harm that social media was doing to our kids. And also there was, a lot of things from my past that were bubbling up that I'd repressed through hard work, overachievement, and alcohol.
Right.
And it was all just coming to a head. And I was hitting 50 soon. And it was just I was like, just want to do something with meaning. I actually believe in this stuff, not just my dad's story, but my children's future. And I thought, if you'd asked me on day one, I said I did it for my dad. And actually, unconsciously, it's turned out, because I've discovered things about myself over the last 2-3 years in therapy, I was actually probably doing it for me. And in the end, I think it was, I don't know, maybe there was an innate survival mechanism, because otherwise there's every chance I could have ended up the same as my dad, dead at 68 years old, having been consumed by mental health worries that had been repressed for decades, So it was an interesting one. But yeah, it was just looking at the world, having gone through some toxic workplaces, understanding how that had impacted me. I had begun sharing, even when I was at Arabian Business, had begun sharing some of my perspectives and some of my experiences on, say, LinkedIn. And the overwhelming response I was getting from people was just like, I thought it was just me. I thought it was just me. Thank you for talking.
Okay.
Thank you for talking. And so the more I looked at the world, I could see there weren't conversations taking place around mental health. There weren't enough conversations taking place around mental health in the public space. I'm quite proud of that fact. For a hot minute, Arabian Business had mental health and well-being at the top of its homepage. It doesn't have that anymore, because it doesn't seem to be editorially important anymore. But for me, it was like, and the more like work gets busy, and the more they wanted me to do something else, and try and take mental health away from me, the more it was just like, no, I want to do this. No, I want to do this. It's like it feels like it's the right thing to do. It feels like this is purpose. This feels like it's aligned with my values, which is something that is quite important to me. And I think sometimes we get lost. I think that gets lost in particularly the race that is journalism, when you that hunt for the stories and the excitement and the deadlines and all that sort of thing. It's like within all of that maelstrom, it's a bit, I imagine, a bit like running it, when you're in a kitchen and you've got all those orders and all that. Where in all of that are your values? So for me, this really did feel like it was the right thing to do on a number of levels.
But at the same time, from a personal perspective, the other thing that I don't think you necessarily take into consideration with your consciousness is that when people are telling you, or you're finding out about seriously traumatic stories, it hits you, but in a completely different way, and taking so much of that on, I think, is also a very tricky thing to manage in somebody's mind, let alone with the job that you were doing. But then if we get into mental space, and for the people who have never heard of it before, first of all, how did you come up with the name? Secondly, what is it that the organization really does?
We do a number of things, and it's not changed, it's grown. MENTL, MENTL, we couldn't afford the A. It started life as a content platform. So it just started as me trying to tell stories, me trying to sit down with thought leaders and just share more information with the world around mental health.
And how long ago did
about 3 years, just under 3 years ago.
Okay.
And it started as a website. MENTL, two reasons. One, you might remember that Ron Seal advert, which is it does what it says on the tin. And I actually wanted it to be like, just be direct. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about mental health. So I wanted to become completely honest with the audience, shall we say. That and fluffybrainsparkles.com was taken. And I just wanted it to be human. A lot of the conversations at the time that you could see, everything was illustrated by non-threatening cartoons. Do you know what I mean? And it was like we were tiptoeing around the topic of mental health,
right? Okay.
As opposed to just honestly talking about the issues that I or you might be facing. So that's where it started. So I started it as a website to start with, and then the mental space is the podcast that we do, where it just naturally flowed from sitting down, having these having conversations with people, which is like, well, let's get the microphones on this, let's get the cameras rolling, and let's share that. So then we had the podcast. That's grown into a live format where we take it out on the road. Right now we've got an amazing campaign which has been backed by a Viatris called Tear Away the Silence. So we go out into the community and tell the story of mental health with different experts and within the community, whether that be in a restaurant. We did last one with Marissa Peer and Dr. Naida from Sakina down at a brilliant restaurant down in the marina. What's it called? Lamo del Bistro.
Yes.
Bistro del Lamo.
A beautiful restaurant.
Beautiful restaurant, yeah. And again, it's like having those conversations in spaces where you wouldn't expect mental health conversations to take place. Beautiful. Do you know what I mean? Glamorous. And in the way, that's also kind of the thesis and the thinking behind the MENTL Awards, which we launched, and now in the second year that you know very well, which is trying to make mental health look something that we should be celebrating, and something that we shouldn't be hiding away. So it's that whole, right, why should we be stepping away from mental health? Why should we put it in the corner and not talking about it? It should, our awards are as glamorous as any fashion do, because that's what life is like here. So why should it be some small dark room? Actually, no, it should be in a glittering 5-star hotel, and we really, really celebrate the work that other people are doing. So that was the whole idea of MENTL, and basically it's just like, let's just drag this out of the dark. Let's try and tackle the stigma, and let's be honest about what we're all going through and celebrate how well we're actually doing, if we are doing well, and also come together and provide some sort of community support for people when they're struggling, because it's that isolation that's really, really challenging, particularly for people when they're struggling with their mental health, is that they don't feel that they can talk to anybody, or they feel it's just them, or they feel that somehow they're weak. And actually the stats and the science is that it's the majority of us are struggling at any given time, as opposed to, it requires courage to talk about mental health. And actually I want it to get to I would love to almost put myself out of business, where we get to the point where we talk about this as much as a headache or as much as a sprained wrist or a broken leg. It should be in our shopping malls, it should be everywhere, because it's all part of one system. We've got physical health and mental health. It's all one system. It's health. All health is mental health. So why are we splitting off one part and not being able to address that, when we're quite happy to talk about physical health?
So, but what I want to focus on are the stats.
Go on.
Because
I've got loads of them.
Because specifically also within hospitality industry, and we're not aware of the stats specifically. So, and I know that you've got them, so I want to hear as much as possible, because I think it is extremely fascinating to know those numbers and understand the impact it has, not just on business but also on people.
Yeah. Where do we start? The conversation I have with the business world often, and that's across all different sectors, is the cost and the potential rewards. So the cost of business right now, Gallup do a global state of the workplace, massive piece of research every year, and they quantified the cost at $9 trillion a year the world economy is losing through disengaged employees. So these are people that are actually turning up to work but are just disengaged. You're treating them badly, so they're not engaged. And we've done the calculations and adjusted for GDP and all that sort of thing for the UAE. And for the UAE, it's potentially up to $4.5 million per hour.
Per hour.
In Saudi, it's just over $10 million per hour. The MENA region is losing around 500 billion a year in lost productivity. So it is one of these things where it's like, we often talk about why it's good business to be a good business, but it's like, just stop that money flowing out of your organization by making some changes, and you're going to be doing considerably better than you were before. If you talk about the ROI, again, there's multiple studies into how well-being impacts your bottom line. But one particular study was actually a study of 100 different studies. So it rather conservatively took the average between the return on investment. So if I spend $1 on well-being of my employees, what do I get back for it? And the average across 100 different studies came back at 327% return on investment, which is a higher return on investment than many cryptos, gold. So again, it still somewhat bemuses me, frustrates me, that organizations don't take this seriously, and from a business perspective, because I would love everybody to receive the wisdom of mental health in their hearts, but we know with the business sector you have to make the financial case. The financial case is undeniable. Right now we live in a world where you've got people like Mark Zuckerberg saying that they want to celebrate a culture of aggression, and somehow that we need more masculine energy in businesses, and that diversity, equity, and inclusion is the enemy of all profitability. It's absolute. Am I allowed to swear on your podcast? Yes. Bullshit. It's total and utter bullshit.
Yeah.
It's them stepping away from their obligations to be a good business for the next couple of years, because let's face it, this is going to last 2 to 4 years. But all the science across multiple businesses, and this isn't me talking, this is McKinsey, PwC, Boston Globe Consulting, all of the huge business-driven research organizations have done reports into this, and they basically show that if you adopt an aggressive culture, you might get a short-term blip in productivity. It might go up, but over time you will lose because your talent will leave your organization, and that actually the best performing organizations are the ones that have sustainable performance inside their organizations. So it's just a nonsense. So we see the statistics. I write a lot of white papers with Cigna Health. They're a really good partner. They do research every year. They survey thousands and thousands of people, and I think 13 different markets around the world: UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kenya, China, US, Canada, all the big markets. They found and this is the thing that almost doesn't make me want to cry, but really frustrates me, that in this part of the world, in the UAE, 80% of employees are willing to work hard and work harder for their organisation to help their organisation succeed. 75% of them are enthusiastic about working in general, which is far higher than the global average. So we've got a highly motivated pool of talent in this part of the world, and yet 66% of them, particularly 18 to 44-year-olds, want to leave their job and find a new job. 2/3 of them. So it's foolish that you have amazing people that are really willing to drive your company forward, but you're treating them so badly that 2/3 of them want to leave. And that figure's gone up over the last 3 years, because it used to be about 50%, and it's now gone up to like 2/3. And even when it was 50%, Cigna did this thing where at the time 50% of the survey respondents wanted to leave their jobs in the UAE. They followed up the year after. And because bosses might roll their eyes and go, oh, well, they say that, but what are they going to do? 4 out of 5 who indicated they were going to leave their job did leave their job. So that's basically 40% of your organization's best talent, because It's your best talent that's leaving. It's your best talent that's able to get jobs. Like, you might go, oh, yeah, but we've probably still got people to do the jobs, but you've got your poorest performers. They're the people that are potentially staying in your organization and
damaging the business.
So it always seems like I've seen this in organizations I've worked for, that we manage to the lowest common denominator rather than the highest possible potential, and it seems foolish, but we still have a private sector that is too insecure in itself. There's a lot of leaders like me in these organizations that are deeply insecure. There's a lot of frightened men running businesses right now, they're my age, who just won't embrace a new way of doing things. But they're on a countdown clock. You look at the Gen Zs and the millennials, they don't want this. Mind you, in any organization, there's a big piece of study that say that the middle managements and the senior managements are having more negative mental health outcomes inside organizations than the general kind of feel of the populace of the workforce. So basically, it's tough at the top, it sucks in the middle, and it's shit at the bottom. This current way of working with burnout and profitability at all costs is no good for anybody. It's how do we tap back to sustainable performance?
So then that's the next question, is how do you, as an organization such as MENTL, how do you then educate these businesses in order for their sort of team to perform much better, for them, for the company to invest in their team, and essentially to ensure that these top dogs, let's say, really understand the value of the training that they're being given in order to reap the rewards later down the line?
It's going to be an interesting space, and I actually think the UAE and Saudi Arabia have got a massive opportunity right now as well, because as the US throws DE&I out the window right now because of the narrative that's coming out there, this is a region that wants talent. It wants the best of the world to come and help this nation and this region thrive.
Right.
So this week, like I said to you before we started filming, I think I've spoken at 7 different conferences in the last 10 days or something like that, including Riyadh, Sharjah, Abu Dhabi and Dubai. There's a massive conversation happening, and the conversation here is being led by the government. The government take this because they know that well-being is good for their economy. If people are thriving, they are more productive. So from a government perspective, they're completely on board with this. And not just for altruistic perspectives. There is the leadership that firmly believes this, but it's also the economics of this. It's better for the country's economies. If people stay here longer, that they thrive here, they're more productive, there's less cost to healthcare, there's further pressures. So for them, they understand that well-being is really, really important. And you look at any of the 2030 plans in Saudi Arabia, the 2040 plans here, mental health and well-being of people is woven into it, because that's long-term planning. It's not short-term thinking. So that's helpful, because we've got the government sending out that message increasingly. We had the Dubai Health Authority recently announced the 105 million dirham project called the mental wealth framework.
Right.
We have a new mental health law that's been enacted by the UAE government, which makes it illegal to discriminate against employees with mental health conditions. So the legislation's coming in. The conversation and the tone and the narrative is being set by the leadership. The private sector do need to catch up, but it's one of these things that they can either be on board this train or they can be run down by it, because ultimately it is those companies that attract the best talent that will rise to the top. So it's attrition through economies. It's these market forces that if you continue to treat your people poorly, you will fail. Don't know what your time period on that one will be, but eventually you will fail, or your competitors, they will rise. They will see the opportunity, because well-being doesn't have to cost a lot. Well-being can start with 2 words, which is please and thank you.
Yeah,
it's all about
exactly.
That literally is it. I mean, there is this. Yes, I have an amazing agency of experts who help us go into organisations and go. We can do all sorts of different interventions, whether it be psychologists, whether it be behavioural scientists, whether it be do you have an employee assistance program. We can put all these things in place, but underneath all of that, what is the foundation? What is the culture? Because it's pointless doing any of all that until you look in the mirror and go, what's the culture of my organisation? Do people feel safe, valued, heard in my organisation? If someone's stuck in traffic, when the manager, and there's a great guy, Kunal from Twitters, told me this, he was an interesting one. It's like, if an employee of yours is not on time and they're stuck in traffic, does the manager pick up the phone and say, where are you? Or how are you? It's that difference thing.
Right.
It's the what's going on with people, and it's common courtesy and it's respect and it's decency. Where is that in organisations? And that costs nothing. The second thing that we try to convince organisations to do is just simply talk and build in time, hold space for this conversation inside your organisation. If you think about your people, your organisation is based on your people's output. Okay, you'll have sales targets, you'll have meetings to do with profit and loss, strategy, innovation, maybe HR meetings as well. But do you actually have mental health and well-being in your Outlook calendar as a meeting where a group of people inside your organisation come together to talk about mental health and how your people are doing every week? Is it a formal part of your company structure? Because in many organisations, it's a bolt-on. It's seen as a nice to have, but it's not anymore. It's fundamental. And every study that comes back saying you look at the future of work and the future of leadership, it is all about. McKinsey had a great piece of research when they looked at the 10 skills that leaders need to succeed over the next decade. Emotional intelligence was linked to 6 of the 10.
Emotional intelligence.
How many emotionally intelligent bosses have you worked for in your life?
Probably 3, I would say.
Out of?
Quite a few.
And I understand where we've got to this point. Like, if you think about back in the day, the way companies were set up was that, and it's a real shame for individuals, but I went through this myself, is you get promoted into a leadership position because you're good at a process. I was chosen to be editor-in-chief because I was a good journalist. I knew what made a good story. I knew what a good newspaper looked like, whether it be light and shade and all that kind of thing. I knew the mechanics of putting a newspaper together. I knew the mechanics of doing a really good website and how do we engage our audience on that. But that didn't make me a good leader. I was never taught how to lead people, how to get the most out of a team.
Right.
And we got so many managers who are in the same position. They are insecure, because they don't really know what they're doing. They know what they're doing in terms of the process, but in terms of managing people, they don't know what they're doing. And right now, we've now got a workforce with Gen Z and millennials who are turning to their managers and going, well, what about my mental health? And the World Health Organization will tell you that it's a universal human right. Mental health is a universal human right. Except my generation, you're a bit younger than me, but we just used to go, jump how high? That was it. And I've got so many managers that look at Gen Z and go, my age, and go, well, we were miserable. Why can't they should be miserable too. It was character building. No, it wasn't. It was bloody awful.
Yeah.
And so it's nonsense, this clinging on to the old way of doing things. And also it's innovation and it's evolution. Like, if you think about the products that we create, even the way that, the hospitality industry and the way that food's prepared, the way that food's, how you innovate in your industry, we don't do things the way actually in some cases maybe you do it like how we used to do it 100 years ago, or maybe there's a return to that. But you don't treat people the way, we don't build products the way we did 100 years ago. Things evolve, things change, things improve, things adapt. But we seem to, when it comes to leading people, we still feel that treating them like we used to in Victorian steel mills is the way to do it. There's a great book by Carl Newport called Slow Productivity, and he talks about pseudo-productivity because we're now in this kind of knowledge-based economies. Like many of us have jobs which are based on knowledge, and there is no real way to track that other than tracking emails, tracking, it's pseudo-productivity when you're like, how do I know if you're working hard for me? Well, I need you in front of me so I can see you sat at your desk. But then we look at that study, which is like, well, if they're sat at their desk and they're disengaged and they're costing you $4.5 million an hour, it's all a fallacy. So can we get back to sustainable performance? I think his 3 tenets in that book are do fewer things at a natural pace and focus relentlessly on quality. That to me seems 3 ways of approaching a business challenge that could really work.
And with specifically with MENTL, so now I'll put it into my context. If we were a hotel, a restaurant, whether 3 Michelin stars at the Formula 1 level, or whether they're just a cafe, let's say, how can I come to you and say, look, Scott, I understand what you're saying. These are the things that are happening. I want to have a much better workplace, in terms of what I have for my team. I want to get the best out of them, but I'm having 1, 2, 3 issues. How can you help?
Well, ultimately, those 1, 2, 3 issues will all stand back to your culture to start with. And do people feel psychologically safe inside your organizations? Like 99% of them, it will come down to that. So what we do with all of our different people is we come in and go, right, let's start on a voyage of discovery. Let's start talking to start with. We have an anonymous tool from MENTL, which is a third-party tool, which is basically it's a sense check. It's a surveying tool to try and find out how people are. But because it's anonymous and captures no data,
right,
people can at least be can be honest with it.
So it's like an app?
Yeah, it is. It's an online.
Or a questionnaire, or whatever.
It's an online tool. That's just one thing where we start with, but it's going in and having conversations and just getting the leadership to go, right, let's talk about this. Let's talk about your organization. You show me where you think you're struggling. You show me where you think the problems are. But then let's look at all of it. Let's look at the data that you're already capturing. Let's look at this from a scientific perspective. Let's look at your talent attrition. Let's look at your hiring and firing practices. Let's look at the sick leave. Let's look at your EAP utilization, if you have one. Let's look at all the data points you've got in your organization and see what that actually says about your organization. And then, most importantly, let's talk to your people. And are your people willing to be honest with you on that?
Well, that's the other point, is that traditionally all of these points that you just raised are traditionally dealt with, let's say, by the human resources department. Yeah. However, every head of department should be the HR for their department at the same time. Yeah. And one point you just mentioned is that how likely am I, if I feel really bad at work, how likely am I to be truthful? Yeah. How likely am I to want to open up a conversation one-on-one with a third party to my manager and say, well, I don't think you've been treating me or the team very well.
Is your organisation run on fear, or is it run on respect? And that's the central question you need to ask yourselves. We've done a lot of work with General Motors, GM, because inclusion is really, really important to them. They've got this mission to become the most inclusive company in the world, right? Which is a big task, but there's a real reason why they did that, because in 2014 they had a culture of fear inside their organisation. It was a toxic organisation. They had problems with their ignition switch on their production line, and they'd known about this for 9 years, since 2005. But because there was such a masculine, toxic organisation, nobody could speak out. Nobody could tell the truth about what was happening for fear of their jobs and for fear of what would happen to them. In the end, 275 people died because of that flaw in the ignition switch. and another 170 people were injured as well. That came home to roost for GM. They got fined and compensation bill in about $1.6 billion. And in 2014, Mary Barra came in and took over the company and changed all its hiring practices, changed that culture, started working to dismantle that culture of fear. Wow. Since that time, over the past decade, and even like how you lead people is built into how people are promoted. It's not about, are they good at job A, task B, procedure C? It's, are they decent human beings? Do they fundamentally treat people with dignity and respect? That's built into their advancement program. And since they've taken over, the past decades, their profits are up 300%. And we're talking roughly around $30 to $40 billion increase in revenue. So don't tell me that it's bad for business. It's actually good for business. What was bad for business was a $1.6 billion legal bill and the human tragedy that culture of fear cost. So having that ability for your employees to come forward and talk. The business world is lit. I don't understand why we never sort of wake up to this and even learn lessons of history. You had a culture of toxicity that dampened down an innovation in Kodak. And they invented the digital camera, and then didn't sell it because the managers would say, "Oh no, you can't do that." Same with Nokia. Nokia used to be the biggest company in the world, but said no to the smartphone. And in these organisations, if you have that kind of cultural fear where innovation can't speak out, eventually you will be punished by the market. It just happens. You need, particularly now with everything that's happening in the world, with AI, with technology, with the digital opportunities that we have, you need smart people who can have great ideas and tell you about them and be heard. And you need to be able to listen to your employees, not just talk at your employees about what you know, because do you really know everything about what's going on at the time? How many managers start a meeting which is like, this is what I think? Doesn't go, how many managers go around the table first to listen to what everybody else has to say first before then telling them their opinion? Now, if they did that, maybe by the time it got back to them, they may have had their mind changed on one or two things. But how many leaders start a meeting with their mind already made up about the direction moving forward, and they don't listen to their people?
Super rare. Because the other thing I want to sort of also address is specifically within hospitality. There has been, still is, and they're trying to change the culture within kitchens, within, it has a rep for being incredibly aggressive. Yeah. And I certainly went through it when working in some certain spaces and places. It was just a case of just get on with it, do your 18, 20 hours a day. Doesn't matter what you're going through, get paid, 5 dirham an hour, and just crack on. And what, so I in fact, I spoke about this on Helen Farmer's show. I didn't know a word for what I was going through at the time. So I would normally have to be in work by 6 to 6:30. This was in London, right?
Yeah. So
6 to 6:30 a.m. to ensure that I was going to get set up.
Yeah.
Otherwise, everybody would start stealing the pots and pans, right? Because if you didn't have them, you're in it to win it. What would then tend to happen is that I would wake up at 5 with no alarm, nothing, and my heart pumping out of my chest, and it would happen all the time, and I just thought it was normal. What I didn't know then, that it was anxiety of the job, of what I had to achieve, I had to go through throughout the day. But then if I sort of fast forward all of the lessons that I've learned throughout the years, I think the single most valuable point is to ask that question to the team, how are you? And asking them, not like in passing, how are you? No, it's deadpan in the eyes, taking the time. How are you? How can I help you? Because, and I'll tell you the truth, Scott, right? When I'm in the kitchen, I'm laser focused because I want to give the best. I'm really super laser focused. I'm firm but fair. When I'm out of that kitchen space, I'm a completely different person, and I'll talk to my team. And that's why I really like to engage them a lot, because I also learn from them. I also like to listen from them, whatever it is. But I think there is this fear, especially in hospitality, especially in those Formula One sort of restaurants, that you can't talk about mental health. It doesn't happen. Ignore it. And then you have the Vesuvius effect of when they just keep it inside and then they explode.
Yeah.
How do you tackle that?
Again, it's one conversation at a time. I mean, we've seen so many stories. I mean, I watched a documentary recently, and a really powerful interview with Heston Blumenthal. You know, one of the greatest chefs in the world, who talked about very, very much the same thing, and how, you know, how he was working, you know, and the long hours that he was putting in to achieve success. But at what cost? At what cost? That you become one of the greatest chefs in the world. You are famous, you're a celebrity around the world. Your mental health is absolutely shattered to the point where it nearly kills you. So was all of that success, you know, worth it? I think he would have a different perspective on that looking back now, in the way he feels now, as opposed to when you're on the journey. And I know, look, here's the thing as well, is that we tend to say, there seems to be this mistaken understanding that well-being comes at the cost of ambition and hard work. Doesn't. You should look at your practices. You should look at if your team are working too hard. You know, that's again to the Victorian Stillman mentality. What can you do about the physical circumstances, the workload? Is there a way to make that better? But ultimately, what's your culture? And if you want to have a culture of long-term, sustainable success,
right,
you know, do fewer things at a natural pace and focus on quality, because that quality will come out. You can be ambitious. You can have big targets. You can swing for the moon. You know, there's nothing to say that you can't do any of all of that and look after your people while you do it. Because the most successful teams on the planet, your Man Cities, your Barcelonas, the sports coaches don't run these successful sports teams on cultures of fear. They don't rob their star striker of confidence before they go on. They don't demean their strikers, their players. They build them up. That's what their job is to get their teams to the point where they can perform their absolute best, you know, for 90 minutes. And it's the same in the hospitality industry. Do you want your team to be on it, to feel like they can innovate, to feel that they can tell you about things that are going wrong, but also how do you get them operating almost not like, you know, to like a machine where they're just well oiled, so that everybody knows and trusts each other? Because if that trust and that connection, you know, is there within the team, everyone will work for each other. They're not fighting each other for the pots and pans, you know. And ultimately, that for me seems like it's a much better recipe for success than a culture of fear. Simon Sinek tells a really good story about the difference in service, and I've had many conversations about hospitality. I've actually recently had one, which is also interesting as well, which was a negative experience. But even down to the waiter that's looking after your table, if that individual is nervous and miserable, you as a customer will see that. If that individual is bright, happy, and smiley, you will have a much better, you know. And is that person allowed to be themselves? Does that person bring their full self to the job? And that translates into better customer service. I was at a hotel recently, and I won't say which one it was, but I was at a 5-star hotel as well, where my daughter at 3 a.m. had a fever of 38.4, and it was spiking. They didn't have Panadol in the hotel, that's fine. So we ordered Panadol to be delivered to the room. The security guard, 2 security guards, plus the on-call duty manager, blocked them delivering the medicine to us because their procedure says that delivery drivers weren't allowed to go to the front because of, I don't know, they said it was to protect privacy, but there's also this perception that it's a luxury hotel and you don't want delivery drivers rocking up at the front. And I had to march down to reception and be quite firm in my tone to go, I have a little girl who's 9 years old whose temperature is spiking. Stop. And the first word that came out of every person's mouth was policy, policy, policy. And that to me is like, okay, you really should be looking in the mirror and going, what is your culture when the 4 different individuals further up the chain can't step away from company policy to actually engage their brain and be a human being and go, right, policy says that, but how are we going to help? So a culture of fear doesn't create great customer service.
Oh my God. So the first rule, as you know, of hospitality is hospitality and to be empathetic.
Yeah.
Right? To understand situations. So when you say that to me, like that entire organization needs to, as you said, needs to have a very, very serious conversation with the upper echelons down to everybody to understand the guest, who is king or queen, right? So, I mean, I'm just astounded by that story, and thank you for sharing.
But that was just another example of, again, if a staff member feels valued, if they're confident, well, they can, the waiter, the busboy, every single touch point with your customers, they're your strikers. Are they scoring goals for you? Right. Or are they scoring own goals for you? Because how many different things go into, it's the service as much as the quality of food.
100%.
You're all part of one team, and if one part of that fails, then the hotel I stayed at was beautiful. The food was amazing. There were many good things I took away from my stay in that hotel, but I still took negative things away from me. And then will I rush back?
Right.
So again, it's short term versus long term. Am I a repeat customer, or did you just get one thing, one amount of cash out of me one time when you could have turned me into a loyal repeat customer?
But I think the other one, which I think is particularly interesting, is that we always have briefings in all of the teams. We always have briefings. But the one thing that they've never had, and in all the years I've worked, is to talk about mental health or have a briefing about mental health. And I've had a few boys and girls come to me and said, just say, Chef, I'm not well today. I've had something happen at home. So I'm just like, okay, cool. Thank you for letting me know. Do you want to talk about it now? Or do you want to talk about it later? And I think that's really important, is also having the leaders specifically. How do they manage to catch somebody who's, because we all know the good days, but how do you catch someone? What's the trick, Scott, in your opinion, on catching someone who's having a particularly bad mental health day?
Well, often you'll see it in their appearance. Often you'll see it either in their tone. Are they looking after themselves? Do they look a bit shabby? Are they irritable? Are they just not themselves on a usual basis? But to pick up on any and all of those cues, and maybe you won't pick up on any of them, because sometimes people with depression hide it incredibly well and will come absolutely immaculate. It is, have you already built that culture of trust where there is a conversation that happens between team members? Often it's the dressing room, if we go back to the football.
Okay.
It's the dressing room that picks up on it rather than the manager. So do you have that? Is there peer-to-peer support within the team? Do the team feel that they're able to talk to the manager about what's going on? And then you as a manager, yes, your job is to get the best out of your team. Nobody overnight made you a mental health expert. So your team needs that training about the signs to spot. But ultimately, you can give them all the training in the world. And again, if it's a culture of fear where people cannot come to you because they fear that it will be weaponized against them, that somehow this is going to impact their job or their financial stability, if that culture of fear is there, all the training in the world is not going to help you. In fact, it's only going to actually. There's a lot of research. Oxford University have a great wellbeing research department that shows things like time management or stress management courses. If you offer them to your employees and yet you still have a culture underneath that is driven by fear and overwork, you actually cause the gap between you and your employees to increase. They get more resentful because you are putting the responsibility for their performance on them and them alone. You're saying to them, you're not handling this well enough. Here's some training to help you handle it. Right. Rather than, am I actually asking something that's fair of my people? So that's the thing. Is there a culture of fear? And then if you've got that training, and if there's a dialogue, then the team supports itself.
So then if any company, again, now I want to talk about the MENTL Awards because I think, as you said earlier on, it's such an incredible thing to celebrate the different sort of businesses that are, putting things together in order to make mental health as normal as possible.
Mm-hmm.
How do companies, first of all, and I'm not talking about hospitality, I'm talking about anyone within that space, how can they be nominated? How do they enter?
Well, this year we're going to be launching soon. We might actually have one in Saudi Arabia soon as well. But we have the MENTL Awards. It's advertised on our website, and we also talk about it on LinkedIn. So you start with a nomination process that you've gone through, and it's basically, we have an independent jury of judges from around the world. Some incredible people here, but some incredible people also from Australia, the UK, experts in their fields. We had Thomas Erickson, the author of Surrounded by Idiots. We had Sir Ian Cheshire, who ran Prince William's Heads Together charity, and is currently working with King Charles on his business trust, I believe it is. So we've got some really wonderful people. Dr. Nahida down the road, who's the Chief Medical Officer of Sakina, one of the government's biggest mental health projects here in the UAE. So it's a very robust journey. You will know, because you've entered them twice and been successful twice, there's 6 different criteria that you have to meet. So not only do you have to talk about the idea, but how it was implemented. What were the steps? What was the research that went into the thinking behind it? What was the problem you were trying to solve? But also, what's the evidence that you actually helped? That this wasn't just a tick box. And that increasingly, like year on year, we put the first year we were, I wouldn't say generous, but we had a target for people to become a finalist, and then this year the threshold went up. So there were people that entered last year that didn't make it this year to the finals, but that's what it's all about. It's just getting a bit better every year, trying to move the needle on mental health. So we begin to understand what good looks like. We're not at excellent yet, but how can we show the UAE, show the region what good looks like in terms of mental health inside organisations, or what individuals do.
Right.
So reach out to MENTL. We'll tell you how to enter. And then the good thing about having all these judges, because then they'll give you feedback as well. And the judges, sometimes I read the feedback and I'm like, wow, that's powerful. So it's a process that's worth engaging with, just to find out how you're doing. Or what more do you need to do? Sometimes it might be a project like, this is a really nice idea, but you're not tracking if it's making any kind of difference. So build in some data points, build in some measurement systems to find out if it is actually making a difference. We've had so many amazing projects over the last couple of years emerge as winners, and it's just inspiring to see what there is good things happening out there. I mean, sometimes we talk about mental health, and we've talked about toxic bosses and that sort of thing. Actually, there are some really good companies out there that are really trying. And this is a relatively new space. It feels, it shouldn't be, but it's a relatively new space. So people shouldn't be afraid to try things and find out whether or not it's working or not.
But what would you say for you? What would you like to see more of? What are your predictions when it comes to not just this part of the region, but also globally? When it comes to the mental health space, if you had a magic Harry Potter wand, what is it that you would really like to see?
More conversation. That is the secret to everything. You can pay my organisation to come in and help you, but fundamental before you do any and all of that, just to have that open and honest conversation with yourself as an individual, with yourself as a leader, and then within the organisation. Because the conversation and creating the space for that conversation, for people to feel that they can come and talk to you, that doesn't have to cost you anything. I'm a business. I want to keep paying for my rent increases and my school fees. But ultimately, within organisations, there are things you can do to optimise, and there are people that we can bring in to help you with all of that. But if you can look at yourself in the mirror and go, do I feel good about my organisation? Do I feel good about me? Do I feel good about myself as a leader? What do I need to learn? What do I need to do? And then what does my company need to do? And so the one thing I want more than anything else is that conversation to happen at all levels with inside organisations. Because if everybody feels safe, heard and valued, you're off to a flying start.
The reason why I ask, Scott, is because I'm one of the co-founders of the Dubai Chefs Collective. So it's me and my friend Shane. And it was just through a chat through the pandemic in 2020. None of us are clinical psychologists or qualified psychologists. But when we got into this space, we very quickly realized that everybody's on the same boat.
Yeah.
And the only thing that we say to anyone is we understand the level of pressure that we're in, and we're only here to talk about to reach out if you want to have a chat. So we're not going to talk about your mental health. However, it's just if you want to go for a coffee, if you want to go for whatever it is, it's just having that safe space to chat. And I think it's just so important in any organization or whatever it may be. I think there are some brilliant people in the world who unfortunately, due to mental health, have lost their lives because they weren't open or they weren't prepared to open up. So I think it's such a gift to do that for people.
I mean, 1,000,000%. And it is that. I come back to the first time I posted about, a workplace challenge that I had on LinkedIn, and I talked about, a former toxic boss that I had, and how that when I used to get WhatsApp messages, my entire body would tighten. It was a physical reaction because I knew it was incoming, and I knew how close to having real issues I was getting. When I shared that, again, it was that I thought it was just me. I thought I was alone. I thought this, from many, many managers reaching out to me, DMing me on LinkedIn. And that showed me the power of just being able to share and also hold space for. I'm not, honestly, I still have more questions than I have answers. I have people I can trust to give answers. I know some amazing psychologists, some amazing psychiatrists, some amazing experts that can give, research-backed advice. I'm not a clinician. I can't give you clinical advice. What I can do is hold the space open for the experts to talk and try and bring people together with better information. But again, it is all that about, look, just have the conversation. I'm still learning. I've spent the last 2 years in therapy trying to deal with childhood trauma. I've been deeply insecure. My core operating system tells me that I am worthless. And I've had that all my life, which has driven a degree of overwork, a degree of alcohol abuse, a degree of insecurity all my life. And it's taken me till 52 to start doing something about that. And that's my story. But everyone's got a similar story. Everyone has these, not everyone struggles with mental illness, but everyone has mental health.
100%.
And it's just it will be on a spectrum. The research right now is that 1 in 4 people will be impacted by a mental health condition throughout their lives. Here in the UAE, they did some studies and actually put that at 1. These the government-backed studies. They put it at 1 in 3. I mean, 3 people in this room. Right. How often in your room? If you think about how many people work in a hotel, 500, 1,000, 1,500.
Yep.
Then, if that ratio holds true, then there's 500 people in there struggling at any given time.
Which is crazy, right?
McKinsey did a massive piece of research across the UAE. It was actually across UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Kuwait, and Oman. And it found that 66% of people were struggling with their mental health.
66%?
Cigna's recent global health international health study, 82% of people are struggling with stress. And we know this. Let's face it, we know this. And we are in a part of the world as well. Overall well-being in the UAE is pretty high. It's higher than the global average, for very good reasons. Because look around the country, it's amazing. And we've got a stable leadership, which really helps. We're not locked, thankfully, in those cycles of crazy elections every. So, and for our kids are safe. We have zero fear of crime living here. And yet when you look at the workplace well-being aspect of it, that's where things become to unravel. And that's where people are struggling. Like say 66. And this again comes back to the nonsense of all of this research. 80% of people here in the UAE want to work harder to help their organisation succeed. But yet 2/3 of them want to leave their organisations, and 82% of them are struggling with stress. It's time for fresh thinking on this.
100%. Thank you for that, because that's really, really, really important for people to know. I think that's incredible. Now, Scott, we have come to the quick fire questions.
Oh, This is where I will struggle. This is going to be bad for my mental health.
So I've tried to make it as easy as possible for you, all right? And of course, they have to be chef food related.
Okay.
Just to let you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what we ask everyone first of all.
Right.
Whether you're a chef or not, what's your favorite ingredient?
My favorite ingredient, red wine.
All right, I'll put it down to grapes.
Yeah.
Lancashire hot pot or Sunday roast?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'm gonna go Sunday roast, but I do love a Lancashire hot pot.
All right. Fish and chips or pie and chips?
Pie and chips.
Now, as of now, what would you say are your top 3 cuisines to eat that you personally love?
I love a bit of Thai, Asian fusion in general. I'm a big sushi fan, but I've recently rediscovered pasta.
Oh.
We went to Austria. We went to Kitzbühel skiing on our first holiday recently, and I had the most amazing carbonara. So good, I had to order a second dish, and I'd never had it. You know, it's like I'd forgotten just how good pasta can be.
Love that. Love that. Now, who would you say are either your top 3 culinary heroes that don't necessarily need to be chefs, or top 3 mental health heroes?
Ooh, good questions. I would say culinary, my grandmother for that Christmas cake. You've got to take your hat off to Jamie Oliver for what he did getting guys even to cook. So I think him. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you look back on the Gordon Ramsays of the world and the shows that used to come out of there, and that's not the kind of culture that we're trying to create. I still remember the idiot sandwich. What are you? I'm an idiot sandwich chef. Yeah. Which was, you know, and it was,
it was gimmicky.
It was gimmicky, but we need to kind of move beyond that kind of conversation. So yeah, culinary heroes. Yeah, I'd go my grandmother, but then hats off to Jamie Oliver for that whole movement of trying to get everyday people cooking. So on that. Mental health heroes. That's a really interesting question because there are so many people out there doing some great stuff. There's some amazing authors out there that are really... The one I love right now is a guy called Oliver Berkman. And he's more about productivity, human productivity. But mental health is so tied to that. And I read his book when I was thinking about what I was going to be doing, and it's called 4,000 Weeks. And the premise of 4,000 Weeks is that if you live to 80 years old, you get 4,000 weeks.
Right.
If you live to 100, you get 52,000 weeks. No, 5,200 weeks. But that really, really hit me because 80 years is endless.
Yes.
I can't picture 80 years. But 4,000 weeks, and I'm 2,700 in. I can see that on the monthly calendar.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh my God, that really scared me. I'm just like, that shows you just how short a time we have.
Wow.
So when you start breaking it down to that, it's like when you look at your kids or you look at your, Christmases, you've got 10 if you're lucky. Family holidays. How many family holidays are you going to go on in your life where your children are going to, be an active part of that?
Right.
13, 14, 15 if you're lucky, and then they're teenagers and they're off beginning to do their own thing. So we actually have less time than we think. So that really helped me focus me on, do you know what? I'll always regret it if I don't try and do this. So let's just try and do this. So that was a good book.
I love that. I love the whole ethos behind that.
And then there's another good book called Man's Search for Meaning. And the name of the author just escapes me. But this is a guy who was in Auschwitz.
Right.
And it's really, really powerful on a kind of lesson on how he couldn't control his surroundings, but he could control how he responded to it. And I wish I could remember his name. Oh, that really is annoying me. But yeah, that whole you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you react to it.
Right. Yeah.
And this is by a guy who was in Auschwitz that lost everything. He lost his wife in there as well. So that's powerful.
Yeah.
So he would be my mental health hero, even though his name. And it literally the minute we turn off the cameras, I'll remember his name.
That's fine. I'll put it all in the show notes as well. Look, the other one is I wanted to ask you, from all of your years whether it's entertaining clients here with family holidays, whatever it may be, what would you say has been either your funniest restaurant or kitchen incident that you've seen or perhaps been involved in?
I was once cheered by an entire restaurant for all of the wrong reasons.
Okay.
I went to a conference. It's the first conference as the editor-in-chief in Turin. I was staying in a very fancy hotel in Turin, and I had a very long day at the conference.
Right.
It's the first time representing my newspaper as the editor-in-chief. And I had a glass or two of whiskey before I went to bed. I went to bed, and in the middle of the evening, the middle of the night, I had call of nature.
Right.
So I walked out into the bathroom with not a stitch on and started blinking, going, this bathroom's very bright and it's very long and it's very empty. And I'd stepped out stark naked into the corridor of my hotel, which was a bit worrying, particularly as the editor-in-chief. And then I start running around the corridor, desperately hoping, waddling around the corridor, desperately hoping for some salvation. And to this day, I'm a subscriber to the Financial Times because someone had a copy of the Financial Times on their doorstep. So I wrapped that round like a pink skirt, and I was grateful for that. But then, obviously, I have to get to the reception to get a key back in. It was when I got to the lift that I remembered that it was a glass elevator that went straight through the middle of the packed restaurant. And on the way down, people started noticing and looking around, and on the way back up, they were all waiting for me to go back up, and there was a thunderous and the worst part of it was when I got back and told my wife what had happened, and I thought she was going to give me a hard time. She just looked at me and went, "Why didn't you use the stairs?"
I have to ask. But luckily nobody filmed this.
No.
Well, but still.
Yeah, I mean, this was, 10, 15 years ago. So back then we weren't filming quite in the same way. But I think I look very attractive in a FT. Okay. So that's my one restaurant story.
What advice would you give to anyone who is going through a mental health challenge?
Talk. Just talk. Try and if you recognize it already. Look, there are the things that they will tell you to do. So exercise is really good for you. Focus on your nutrition. What are you eating? Are you drinking too much? Are you drinking too much alcohol? We know those practical things that are good for you. But beyond all of that, just reach out and talk. Because, again, the statistics will tell you, you need to know that you're not alone in this. You are not alone. The statistics show us that we are all struggling in one form or another. And if you reach out, often we feel that we're going to get judged. You won't be. Find someone that you trust and have that conversation. Sometimes you don't even need to talk about it. Sometimes it's just going for a walk with a friend.
Yeah.
And you just need to find that person that will hold that space for you to allow you just to get out and move a bit. But the whole point is that don't be afraid to reach out. And also, if you do need, don't be afraid of therapy. There should be no stigma into therapy. I still look at therapy as, we seem to only ever reach out for therapy as a reaction to a crisis, as opposed to ongoing maintenance to keep us optimized. But if you need professional help, don't be afraid to call. The UE's got a helpline that people can call. Often there are health insurance benefits that you don't know about inside your organisation. If they have an EAP, often people don't reach out to their EAPs that have 24-hour counselling because they feel it's going to get weaponised. But by the HR departments, but any of the EAP providers will tell you that it's completely anonymous, and they never give that data to the employees, even though there's they are a service provider. They won't tell your employer what you're going through.
That's
so
good to know.
Find out what help is available to you, but it's your community, it's your friends, it's your loved ones. Just talk.
And what advice would you give to a 16-year-old Scott Armstrong?
Be a bit kinder to yourself. Really. I'm 52 years old and I still can't do it. It's that feeling of having worth, and that actually, you have worth in this life, and just be a bit kinder to yourself. I think we all need to be a bit kinder to yourself. If there was more kindness in this world, I think we'd be in a better position.
Now, Scott, if anybody wants to get hold of you through social media, what are the best means?
LinkedIn's my best platform, and if they just search for Scott Armstrong MENTL, MENTL, they'll find my profile. Or if you search for the business, MENTL, MENTL, they'll find our company page. Our website is pretty easy to remember. It's mental.space, which is the same as our podcast. So MENTL.space, SPACE. And they can find ways to, all our contact details are on there as well.
Perfect. I'll put all of that in the show notes as well. Now, Scott, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you very, very much for taking the time to be on the show, because I know that you're extremely busy.
No, man, I love your work.
And really, from a personal perspective, the work that you're doing is making a massive and a monumental difference in all landscapes. So on behalf of the Chef JKP podcast, thank you so much for inspiring so many people, and to keep inspiring them, and to really understand and let them know that there is a place to talk, and just to be open and free to do that without any judgment. And I really just wanted to say thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you. The imposter syndrome in me makes it difficult to accept compliments, but I accept the gift of your compliment. Thank you very much. But also thank you for the work you're doing with the Chefs Collective. Thank you for creating a space for your community. We need more people doing that. So thank you.
Scott just didn't scratch the surface. He went deep, unraveling the complexities of mental health with clarity and passion. His journey from journalism to mental health advocacy is nothing short of inspiring. What hit home for me, the realization that our relentless pursuit of culinary excellence, we often sideline our own well-being. Scott's insights are a wake-up call, a reminder that taking care of our mind is just as vital as perfecting that signature dish. If this conversation resonated with you, which I bet it did, share it, pass it on. Pass it on to your colleagues, friends, or anyone who could use a mental health check-in. Let's keep this dialogue going and support each other in and out of the kitchen. A massive thank you to Scott for his candidness and dedication to the cause. For more information on MENTL and all of the work he does, everything, as always, will be in the show notes. Now remember, you can catch all of the previous episodes on YouTube. And if you haven't already, make sure to follow, share, and hit that all-important subscribe button, which helps the show to keep growing. Now, don't forget, you are an absolute legend for tuning in to the entire show. So thank you very, very much indeed, as always. Until next time, food is memories.